Apologies to everyone, I'm going to do this in English because my Portuguese skills when it comes to technology are just absolutely horrendous. I got asked to talk about the future of the internet. And those that know me, I'm a pretty generally optimistic person. However, the first title that came to mind was this one, Moving the World Away from Dystopia Using Crypto, which is not incredibly positive in terms of outlook on what the internet can be. So, who am I? Why am I doing on the stage? So, as was described, my name is Diogo Mónica. A little bit of my career, I was born in the US, grew up in Portugal. I did a PhD at Instituto Superior Técnico in computer science, and in 2011, I went to the US. I worked at one of the largest fintech companies in the world as a very early employee called Square, where I led the security team. Later, I went to lead security team at a company called Docker that now runs on every single cloud provider in the world and is one of the most commonly used cloud technologies in the world. And about 6 years ago, I started a company called Anchorage Digital. Anchorage is the first bank that custodies cryptocurrencies to have an actual federal charter, an actual official bank. We do custody for institutions that want to participate in crypto. So my background is an academic, turned security engineer, turned entrepreneur, turned banker. And that is the context and the biases that I'm going to bring to today's talk. So first, I want to start in the future. The year is 2030, okay? You open your browser and you're going to read news on the internet. And the first news item that shows up on your feed is the following. Portugal unveils Tuganet, a new national internet exclusively for Portuguese citizens. The subtext says, in a move that has raised eyebrows amongst internet freedom advocates, the Portuguese government has announced the launch of Tuganet, a new national internet network that will be exclusively for Portuguese citizens. The network, which will be separate from the global internet, is designed to provide a more secure and controlled environment for Portuguese citizens to access the internet. This is the first news item that you see. After this one, you see this. Portugal announces PDP, a new government agency to combat disinformation online. In a move to address the growing problem of disinformation on the internet, the Portuguese government has announced the creation of a new government agency called Polícia de Desinformação Pública, Portuguesa. The agency will be tasked with identifying and combating disinformation on the internet with a focus on social media platforms. Okay? Headline number 2. Headline number 3. Portugal introduces new citizenship credit system and limits the access to Sistema Nacional de Saúde to high scorers. In an effort to improve the efficiency and fairness of its social services, the Portuguese government has announced implementation of a new citizenship credit system. The system assigns a score to each citizen based on their compliance with various civic responsibilities, such as paying your taxes and participating in community service. Okay, so now, these are the 3 general buckets of topics that we've talked about. The first one has to do with the balkanization of the internet, a phenomenon called splinternet. We talked about how governments may isolate and create new internets that are not connected to the internet that we commonly know. The second phenomenon is what I'm calling government control of truth, where in the fight to stop disinformation, there's effectively a creation of new government entities that define what is true, what is not true. And the third bucket is this centralized social credit system. It turns out that as long as there's data available on citizens, and citizens don't push back on the use of that data, governments will use that data for whatever purpose that they have. So of course, now you tell me, okay, Diogo, that's all fine and great, but that's 2030, and you made up those headlines. Those are not true news stories. That's fair. However, let me show you 3 other news items, 3 other headlines. All true. First one. From The Guardian, Brazil's controversial plan to extricate the internet from US control. China already has the Great Firewall of China. Russia is mostly unavailable, and many services are unavailable to inside citizens. And Iran already has many types of filters that stop Iranian citizens from accessing services outside of Iran. So this is not a phenomenon that is not actually happening. It's a phenomenon that is happening all across the world. Primarily, obviously, in regimes that control their citizens in many other ways, but now coming towards democracies in traditional countries that you wouldn't expect that would actually go down this path. Headline number 2. The Intercept. Truth cops. Leaked documents outline the Department of Homeland Security's plan to police disinformation. This is a true news item on how, in the United States, the country in the world that fights the most for freedom of speech, there was a government entity that was being given both the authority and the tools to police disinformation online. And then the third headline, China's social credit system ranks citizens and punishes them with throttled internet speeds and flight bans in the Communist Party, deeming that they deem untrustworthy. From Business Insider. This is actively happening. In China right now, if you have any kinds of issues, run-ins with the government, your social credit score will decrease and you won't be able to access the internet, travel, and even leave the country. So I hope at this point you are convinced that, yes, I created fake news items about Portugal. They're not actually true, but this is actively happening, and all 3 of these categories are happening out in the world. So of course, they don't happen by a government saying that, hey, we're going to balkanize the internet. That's not what anybody says. What we say as a government is we are creating a more secure and controlled environment for citizens to access the internet. And it makes some sense if you think about it. The criticism that some countries like the United States have more control over the internet than other countries is actually factually accurate. And it makes sense that if you create a golden garden, you will have less security issues. But it also means that you are down a path where citizens will not have access to the information outside of their golden garden and outside of their local internet. In speaking of disinformation, nobody talks about government's control of truth. That would be the worst sales pitch ever. They talk about always combating disinformation on the internet. The goal here is to say that disinformation hurts people and may have many problems towards society. And so what we're going to do is we're going to centralize the way to define what's true, what's not true. It's always towards the positive of managing a problem. In this case, the problem is disinformation. However, even in the United States, the government, during the pandemic, just in the past 2 years, could not decide whether masks were good or masks were not good. The same government said multiple times, swapped their opinion on whether masks, something as simple as mask wearing, was good or not good. So if a government can't be trusted to actually be factually accurate and have scientific rigor about their facts, how can we actually let them police the truth? And finally, nobody's talking about centralized social credit systems, right? They're always talking about improved efficiency and fairness of social services. But as long as data from citizens is available for the government to consume, there will always be a slippery slope in which they will use it to control citizens and to help them manage the efficiency of their social services. So this is a little bit depressing, and hence why I made the point that I'm generally a positive person, and here I am with not a very positive message on something that is actually happening. But I want to give you a directionally accurate, but obviously oversimplified view of, number 1, how we got here, number 2, why the web is broken, and number 3, how do we move forward, and how crypto can help. And I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning, 1970. All of you know that the intellectual precursor of the internet was something created by DARPA called ARPANET. The goal of ARPANET was to create a decentralized infrastructure that did not depend on comms lines, phone comm lines, and that allowed them to have long-distance packet switch communication. That was the purpose. The myth is that they actually created ARPANET as a way to mitigate against potential nuclear attacks. If there was a nuclear attack in a part of the network, they could survive it and still communicate with their systems and have their nuclear logicos work somewhere else in the country. That is the myth. The ARPANET was, importantly, decentralized and based on open protocols. And it was after ARPANET that internet came to be, and on top of the internet, with open protocols such as DNS and TCP/IP, that the first version of the web was created. So now we are in the 1990s. We create the first version of the web. Protocols like SMTP and HTTP are being used across the board. And there's a couple of applications that come up from the ground up. Things like email, which you're very familiar with, things like the web. So the use of personal websites, news websites, effectively read-only content that was available on the internet was all based on decentralized infrastructure from the internet and open protocols like HTTP and email. And in fact, to this day, you can still have your own domain. You can still have diogomonica.com or your own email, diogo@diogomonica.com. This is a definition of a decentralized and open protocol. Anybody can participate, and it's very hard to have a central entity to shut down. Unfortunately, there were two problems with Web 1. The first one is that it was extremely technically complex for somebody to create their own website or somebody to host their own email. And the second issue was that it became very obvious that consumers didn't just want to consume news or consume personal websites. They wanted to contribute. They wanted to create content too. And this leads us to Web 2.0. The obvious realizations of Web 1.0 crystallized in a technology that, while it was still built on the same open protocols as Web 1.1, fell into the trap of centralization. We started creating centralized companies because it was easier to have growth from consumers if their access to these platforms was centralized. And number two, we started allowing them to produce this content and putting them up on the platforms. That was the beginning of Web 2, not just read, but write too. And that's where we got to these companies that we all love to hate, right? It was in Web 2, and these are great examples of companies that are fundamental Web 2 that created the phenomenon of centralized parties where you can read and write. In Facebook, you shared pictures, you shared your posts. With Google, you interacted to get answers and search the web. With YouTube, you were providing and uploading videos. And with Twitter, you were trolling people on the internet. But, you know, that's despite the point. It's neither here or there. And it turns out that it was here, in this moment, that everything went wrong. It was here that we all succumbed to what I call the capital sin of the internet. What is the capital sin of the internet? Ads. In the search for monetization of these highly centralized production and consumption websites, we fell into the trap of going towards the most basic version of monetization we had on TV and on radio, which was to plaster ads on everything. And look, these companies are not really to blame. The internet was not built for payments. The friction of accepting payments in early 2000s was very hard. There was no internet native money. We did not have the way of monetizing these platforms in any other way. And so this was the trap that we fell into, the capital sin of the internet. We started using ads as the core way to monetize the internet. And unfortunately, this misaligned the incentives of you, the consumer, and them, the platforms. Why? Well, because if ads is the way that you generate revenue, now data is the way that you optimize your revenue using ads. And so what happened is that we entered in a dystopian version of the internet where people literally started calling data the new oil. Your data, their oil. In order to optimize and generate more ad revenue, we started effectively collecting all sorts of data. People's location, transaction history, preferences, friend connections, pictures, you name it. Everything is centralized in a couple of these companies. And now, not only these companies have a list of all of the activity that you have in all of your political affiliations, there's just a couple of them, one or two of them, that leaves them vulnerable to many things. But one of the things that it leaves them the most vulnerable to is the fact that Data is actually not oil. Data is toxic waste. The more data they accumulate, the likelier it is that they die of radiation poisoning. As a society, we have now decided that accumulating data is actually horrible for you. In what ways? Well, number one, the more data you have, the bigger of a target you are for hackers. Every single company out there has been hacked one way or another. The more data you collect, the bigger of the target you are. Number two, the more data you collect, the more liability you have. Not just liability for government entities that control your companies, but for foreign actors, foreign adversaries, and foreign entities, foreign governments that will subpoena you to go get the information from your users. It is very known that many hacks, Google's Aurora, Facebook's hacks, Twitter hacks, were actually perpetrated by sovereign entities. China being the main one, looking for information on dissidents. And so, what we've created is a system that incentivizes companies to collect as much data as they can because their only business model is ads, thus handing the government and hackers a nicely filed, neatly placed position in place where all the data is there for them to consume and access and potentially abuse. And so this is where crypto comes in. And I know when I talk about crypto, all of a sudden your brain short circuits and you start thinking about this. Start thinking about Lamborghinis, and you start thinking about coins coming from the sky and volatility. And fair, all of that does exist. However, crypto is not just cryptocurrencies. Crypto is really a set of tools and technologies. And Web3 really comes from the marriage of the internet with the crypto principles and the crypto technologies. And so today, I want you to move away from this, and I want you to think about these sets of technologies that are powering, yes, cryptocurrencies, but also have very general applicability and can apply to many other places on the internet, including to protect our data. You know of distributed ledgers because you've all heard of blockchain, but more than that, there's lots of research being done because of cryptocurrencies on cryptographic identities. There's a lot of products that finally do self-sovereignty and self-custody of data because of cryptocurrencies. There's DeFi happening, there's decentralized autonomous organizations, there's all of these technologies to support this ecosystem that have broad general applicability. And that is something that is extremely important. Let me give you an example. Zero knowledge proofs. Before I go to zero knowledge proofs, let me show you something. This is the state of the internet today. I don't know if you know this, but when you log in onto a website, you have a secret, usually a username and password. In my case, my username would be diogo@anchorage.com, and my password would be Cristiano Ronaldo07, whatever it is. When you log in onto the website, you not only send your email, but you actually send your password. You send your password. So a secret that I'm supposed to have, a secret is not supposed to be shared. And here I am to try to identify myself as Diogo to you. I literally give you my secret. That is absolutely insane. This is how the internet works today. Every time you log into a website, this is actually what's happening. You are sharing your secret. Cristiano Ronaldo07. Google can see it, Facebook can see it, Twitter can see it. It's absolutely insane. There's this technology called zero knowledge proofs, which is heavily under research, but it's been around for a couple of decades. And it's heavily used by cryptocurrencies. And it sounds like magic, but what it enables you to do is you can prove to a party, such as the verifier, that you know some secret without telling them what the secret is. And I know it sounds like magic, but it's math. So you can actually look it up and see that this actually works. So you can log in onto a website, you can prove that you know your password without ever giving your password to anyone. And that's a potentially contrived example, but this also works with any kind of data. You can pay something with a credit card without ever sharing your credit card. You can sign up for something using your social security number without ever sharing what the social security number is. This is a very general applicability tool that serves for everything on the internet, not just cryptocurrencies. And so it is really these tools and these technologies that are giving us the ability of having a better path towards the internet, Web3, based on three big fundamental core tenets. The first one, decentralized. If we don't want balkanization, we need to become robust to balkanization by decentralizing our services and our platforms. If we don't want a government to be able to shut down a platform, we need to be decentralized to ensure that we're not an easy target for us to be shut down in the first place. Number two, private by default. The best way for our data not to be used as toxic waste and for us not to have toxic waste is for the data not to exist in the first place or to be encrypted. And this does not mean that companies can't use it for their own purposes. In fact, Apple today uses something called differential privacy on your iPhone in a way to collect data from all of you in an anonymous fashion without identifying the behavior of each individual. So there are practical tools like zero-knowledge proofs and differential privacy that allows us business people to run businesses, extract information from data without collecting toxic waste on our databases. And then finally, self-sovereignty. It is time for us to take the actual responsibility and permissioning around our own data to make sure that we don't actually get too abused by governments that attempt to take our rights and the rights to our data. So the next time you see and talk about cryptocurrency anywhere, I really want you to stop thinking about the Lamborghinis and about the coins and about the volatility, and instead think about these three headlines. Because these are the headlines that these technologies and that crypto in general are helping make sure don't come to fruition. Thank you very much.